Well, guys, this is a very special episode of That's Just It because I have my first guest ever. Fantastic. Anyway, with me on the line is Leigh Wilson, the host of Behind the Panels podcast that I advertise a lot. So I'm going to ask Leigh to introduce herself and we'll get this show on the road. Leigh, tell us about yourself.
Hey guys, nice to meet you. I'm a fan of the show, and I really enjoy movies. Not all the same ones as Tom, but enough to put in my 2 cents. Glad to be here.
All right. So this week's episode, I don't really do these on a weekly basis. This this episode is Godzilla King of the Monsters. Now, we've both seen this fairly recently, so it's still fresh in our minds, so let's talk about it. So, Godzilla King of the Monsters. I am, of course, a giant Godzilla fan. Godzilla was my first movie monster ever since I was a kid. Um, Leigh isn't as much into these movies as I am, but
I I believe the first one that I saw all the way through was Godzilla versus Mothra. Of the classics, that's really the only one that I've watched all the way through. I enjoyed the new reboot, not Shin Godzilla, but the American one. So,
yes, we're working on getting her to see Shin Godzilla.
soon, soon.
Yeah. So, thoughts and impressions about King of the Monsters, Leigh?
I really liked it. For me, it was just a fun movie just to sit through and really. It's not like a very. I tend to go more towards thought provoking cinema that leaves your brain hurting afterwards. So it definitely wasn't that, but it was still a very good movie from a cinematic point. Like the directing, the writing, it all felt really well balanced. The only problem I really had with the movie was pacing, and I'm not sure if this is just me or if this was a thing across the board, but I really felt like at some points it was very rushed to get to the monster fight specifically, and it really dragged a lot in the dialogue heavy parts.
Okay, fair enough. Um, Now, as I've mentioned before, I am a big Godzilla fan, and Miss Wilson isn't the biggest yet. We're working on it though. It's taking a little bit of time. But coming from, I mean, you can't see it from here, but over on the shelf, I have a whole heap of Godzilla films. Both the 2014 American remake and almost, well, not almost everything from 54 to 2004, but a fair bit. And I can say that, I mean, there are some issues with the pacing. I'd agree with you there. Some of the more dialogue heavy scenes may drag out and then like quickly jump ahead because, oh, we gotta have a monster fight. But that's kind of how those movies went. A lot of the.
That's what I remember from Mothra is is that it's dialogue and oh now we're fighting, now we're
Mhm.
dialoguing, now we're fighting.
Yeah, and there's often parts where there's a lot of dialogue and then a quick snippet of a monster fight and then lots more dialogue and then like there's a growing threat, there's more stuff going on, and then like the last half hour of the movie or whatever is monsters duking it out and just demolishing everything in sight. And that happened a lot in this film. And as a fan of classic Godzilla, I was like, oh my god, like holy crap baskets, this is finally happening. Um, I I really liked um, the 2014 American remake in that it builds tension. It like it keeps like building up the things and then cutting away before it really gets too in depth with it. And that was a very effective way of telling that story, and I think that needed to be done for the first one. But for the second one, it's almost like the director knew, oh well, they've seen all this before. What's the point of like building up tension and then cutting away? Let's just give them what they want and give them all these monster fights. And that was outstanding for me.
Without saying too much, I really enjoyed from a writing perspective. There's a very good, well, there's something you don't really see coming that surprised myself. I believe you mentioned that it surprised you as well.
Yeah, we're not gonna get too much into that now. We're gonna avoid spoilers as much as we can because that's a dick move to spoil
absolutely.
a movie. um,
Avoiding spoilers, what did you think of the effects, specifically of the monsters? Because you're such a big Godzilla fan.
For me, part of the charm, like the real classy charm of the older films, is the fact that, yeah, it's a dude in a rubber suit wrestling in a fake city that's probably about as big as my basement with a matte painting sky all behind him. And I love that. I think films look much better with practical effects because there's really something that catches lighting accurately and you can, frame properly. And but that being said, the effects in the American remake so far have been exquisite. I like, that they've really stayed true, I think, for the most part at least, to the essence of the character from the Japanese films. They're, we don't like to talk about the 1998 remake here because it's an abomination. And it was Godzilla in name only. That's something that a lot of G fans like myself have been saying about it in recent years. I liked the effects. I liked them a lot. I thought this time around we see more of the monsters, and even just over 5 years, CGI has come a long way, and there's a lot more intricate little details. Like if you look at Godzilla and his face and his back and his chest and stuff, you can see little nicks and scars from his battle with the Mutos in the 2014 film, and that was really cool for me. And
I liked that they brought the Mutos back. That
yes.
There weren't just those two from that other film.
Yes, there were some more recognizable monsters. Like you had Ghidorah and you had Mothra and Rodan. And at one point there was something, they've shown this in the trailer, so I don't think it's too much spoiler territory here, but something like comes up from under a mountain. And at first I thought it was Anguirus, because Anguirus frequently does that in the Japanese films. And Lee doesn't know what Anguirus is yet, but
no clue.
we'll get there. Anguirus does that, and then there was like a spindly legged thing crawling around, and I thought it was Kumanga, the giant spider, but it turned out to be like a weird crustacean looking thing. And then there was another sort of Muto from the first one, but it was more like ridged, and it was really cool looking. But they also
I wonder
if
they're setting up for more movies exploring these other monsters that they've shown us.
I think so. I know that. It's common knowledge that there's going to be a Godzilla versus Kong film coming up.
Yes,
they announced
and they reference Skull Island so much, like not overly, but enough that fit the plot. And it got me excited because I'm out of movie monsters. I like King Kong a lot. You know, that's.
Well, that and
But
King Godzilla versus King Kong is a big deal because I mean I have a copy of King Kong versus Godzilla down there, and it's the first time both monsters appeared in color, which is really cool. And obviously they had to beef King Kong up to Godzilla size so that it wouldn't just be like well, there's a little ape, that's it. But
yeah,
but yeah, it was a good film. That was really good, and I really can't wait to see where they go from here in regards to that. And I mean, they made mention of it all throughout the film that there are a whole heap of these other monsters that have been discovered, and that it sets it up for other films. Like we could have other monsters, more recognizable ones, like Mothra and Rodan and stuff like that showing up. But who knows?
that was something that I really did enjoy. Were the 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 monsters that they pitted against each other. I think that they were really fun to watch. They were well matched. Um, the writers clearly had like full on character sheets of these strengths and weaknesses in front of them, and just went down and said, okay, well this can counter this, but if we come back with this attack, okay, that'll look cool, like.
Yeah, it was almost like they had a D&D character sheet of everything the monsters can do. And
Oh, definitely.
and I think, like you said, I think that went a long
checked it off
way.
as they went.
Yeah, they kind of just, okay, he can do that, he can do that, he can do that, and that is particularly in regards to Godzilla himself. There's a few character traits that were present in the Japanese films that they brought back for this one that weren't quite as prevalent in the 2014 film. Like, they briefly mentioned it, that the monsters feed on radiation. And in this one, they really delve more into that, in that, radiation makes, like, more exposure to radiation makes the monsters stronger, which is something that happened a lot in the Japanese films as opposed to the American ones so far. But
I mean, you know what they say. Nature has shown again and again how... Oh, I said that wrong.
Yeah. Attempting to quote song lyrics here, and it's... Anyway. But yes, history shows again and again how nature points out the folly of man. And that was a theme that was really evident in this. And it was just a solid film.
And I know this is going to come up in some discussions that it was a political movie or whatever, but I really think that this is something that Godzilla has always dealt with the nature of human beings and the nature of how we treat the planet.
Mm-hmm. I mean, from 1954, Godzilla has always been a metaphor for the destruction, caused by nuclear warfare and the damage that we're doing to the planet. And again, that was very evident in this, and it was almost like Ghidorah for me almost represented like a sort of nature striking back, as opposed to Godzilla representing the balance. Because that was a big theme in the 2014 film and this one, that Dr. Serizawa, wow, it's been a long day, that Dr. Serizawa said that Godzilla will, restore the balance, where Ghidorah tips that scale in that nature strikes back. I mean, like, he travels in a hurricane, like that's one of the most destructive events in nature, and it was outstanding.
Yeah. The more we talk about it, the more I realize just how much this is going to be a movie that I sit down and think about in the future and go, oh man. Because it's one of those that the more you think about it, the heavier it gets.
Mm-hmm.
When you're watching it, it's a good, fun monster romp. But when you actually sit down afterwards, you're like, oh wow. So.
And my experience watching a lot of the films is that's Godzilla for you. You'll sit down expecting to watch a nice, fun monster romp, and then you get some morality tale about it, about taking care of the planet, or like doing away with weapons of mass destruction, or what have you. And there's a lot more to these movies than just silly overdubbed lines and men in rubber costumes wrestling. Like there's a deep subtext to everything, with the exception of a few. Because like I think back to Godzilla's Revenge, and I'm like, what the hell is going on in this movie? Like that's one we'll get to, because it is, oh boy.
Am I sensing a Godzilla series coming up on this channel?
Well, I would have to I like having physical copies of all the movies that I review, and it would be nice to have physical copies of all of the Godzilla films to watch and review, but anyway. But yep, so there were some things in the film, we briefly talked about this before I got this all set up, but there was a lot of little Easter eggs, I guess, for Godzilla fans like myself that probably went over the heads of some casual viewers.
I'm not gonna lie, I felt like my mother when we watched Detective Pikachu, in that I recognized a lot of the creatures that were on the screen, and I realized they were important, but when I saw Mothra, I was like, oh, I know that one! I'm very excited, I know that one!
Yeah, there was...
But I didn't ever feel like I was lost.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know them.
Yeah. Even if... because there was Godzilla 2014, and then there was Kong Skull Island. And I feel like even if you didn't see Skull Island, you can still follow what's happening fairly easily. And there was enough throwbacks to the old Japanese films that a lot of fans like myself are really happy. Like obviously there's the monsters, the recognizable ones like Ghidorah and Mothra and Rodan, but there was also reference to the Oxygen Destroyer, and for a long time Ghidorah is referred to as Monster Zero, which is a throwback to an older film as well. And I mentioned this briefly when we were talking earlier, but there were also snippets of the original Godzilla theme. And that was... like, I lost my mind when I heard that. Like, holy crap! Like, as soon as he shows up and there's those, like... dun 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 dun. I'm like... like, holy crap baskets, that's the theme! That's the theme! That's like when Danny Elfman's Batman theme shows up in Justice League, and you're like, oh, like, I love that stuff. But
well, it's definitely a movie that knew its audience and still managed to draw in a new audience as well. Piqued my interest for sure.
Which is good, and really, that's what a Godzilla movie should do. There should be enough human drama to keep you invested, and there should be enough monster action to draw in even the most casual viewer of the series. And I think this one struck a balance between the two fairly nicely. I do have one complaint. I know you had a gripe with the pacing and whatnot. My one gripe is that in the 2014 remake, they fought in the dark, in the muck, in the rain, and everything was kind of gloomy. I want to see these monsters in the daytime duking it out. Just one time. That's all I want. Hopefully, when King Kong fights Godzilla in the next inevitable monster movie of this Monarch Monsterverse or whatever they're calling it these days, there's a fight scene where they duke it out in the daytime. I I know
I think this movie suffers from something that Hollywood has just gotten bogged up in, with the sepia tones and the the dimming of the edges of the film, and it's very much a product of its time, editing wise.
Yes. And I know that it's probably easier on CGI animators and whatnot to do this stuff like in the dark, and that way the CG doesn't stand out as much. But like, it's a cheesy monster movie. Like, show them during the daytime. Goodness gracious. But anyway, final thoughts on King of the Monsters, Leigh?
I think it's really good. Even if you're just a casual fan, I recommend, going to see it, maybe catch a matinee. Just have a good time.
Yeah. Grab some popcorn and watch some monsters duke it out. And, that's just it. See you next time. Hey guys, thanks for checking out this latest episode of That's Just It. I want to thank Leigh Wilson for taking her time and appearing on the show. Hopefully won't be the last time, because I like having her around. So thank you, Leigh, for coming out and appearing on the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, guys. And as always, check out the Cinescape movie reviews page on Facebook and Beyond the Panels, the podcast. I will post the links for both in the description below, and we'll see you next time.